Innovation is the thing that drives so many fields. But is there such a thing as arriving to a party too early? Well, before they invite you to the party, that's a bad time. Sometimes games or companies manage to innovate on a field that becomes the lay of the land sometime in the future, but for the time that they were created in? Look at a game like Earthbound. At the time, not many paid it much mind. Might have had something to do with Nintendo telling everybody it stunk. Nowadays, its influence over the indie game scene is undeniable. Nier, Grim Fandango, every single game Clover Studios ever made, the public might not have realized it, but the industry was changing without them even noticing. The same is true in the trading card game space, as before Master Duel, before Magic the Gathering Arena, before Pokemon TCG Live, there was Chaotic. So the world caught a terminal case of Chaotic in Denmark in the year 1999, with the engineers behind the infection being Jacob and Henrik Andersen. They started Draco Company in 1997, a Danish toy company that made toys mostly for their region. And they looked a hell of a lot like toys from other regions, but who's asking? Any release of theirs that did come stateside would be handled by a different company, like Topps Collectibles in the case of Toons, and their most famous toy, Draco Heads. These were weird-looking collectible little figures that you could collect, trade, or even play little games with, like marbles, bowling, or guessing games. Somehow, the brothers feared they had left space unexplored in the Draco Heads realm and decided to make an expansion, Draco Heads 2. This added that sweet, sweet lore to the toys, as they were now two warring factions of intergalactic space aliens, the Gravali and the Gorkvi, searching in the overworld and underworld for the fabled Draco Stone, so they could use it to power their spaceships and return home. You needed this much lore to throw a piece of plastic at a wall? That storyline clearly struck a chord as the series continued getting more and more popular than the last iteration, getting promotions with ice cream companies, and a CD of songs explaining the lore, including one that says ass and f***.
If a girl comes down, I'll kick his ass and chase him around. Nobody f***s with the way we live in Gorge.
Eventually, the toy line would get rebranded to make it seem like any thought went into the name at all, from Draco Heads 2 to Grolls and Gorks. This rebranding change brought a new set of trading cards that gave each of the monsters stats: wisdom, power, courage, and speed, on top of a health stat and magic rating. As for the game you were meant to play with the Grolls and Gorks cards, nobody's really sure anymore. Grolls and Gorks, and Draco Heads in general, were always treated as game pieces rather than pieces of a unified game. You could play whatever you wanted with them, and when it came to the actual unified Grolls and Gorks game, the rules have just been lost to time. What wasn't lost, though, was the idea. As a year later, in 2001, the game would be rebranded a second time to Chaotic, Now or Never. It should be noted by this point, though, the license was out of Draco Company's hands and into Apex Marketing, a company run by Brian Gannon, who bought the rights to the game and was looking for a way to sell it in America. The early 2000s was right in the boom of collectible card games in America, thanks to Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! So Brian rightly understood that this was a hot market, and Chaotic could stand out. How was that? Well, even back during the days of Now or Never, the cards integrated an online component to them that would carry over into the latter days of the franchise. Each card, alongside the wisdom, power, courage, speed, health, and magic rating, would also have a code on the bottom that corresponded to your specific card. Enter the code on the website, and that card, with its randomized stats, would be added to your online collection. The stats themselves weren't too randomized, they would always add back up to the same base stat total, but it meant that two kids with the same card would have different versions. Those Chaotic Now or Never cards as well started a whole new storyline that only really kept the idea of overworlders versus underworlders from the old Grolls and Gorks days, while adding the new all-lizard tribes of the Mepedians and the all-ant tribe of the Danians. Underworlders would be led by Kaor, a character dating all the way back to the first wave of Draco heads as Diablo, while the Overworlders were led by Madcap. The game itself would be modified after finding its new American distributors, 4Kids Entertainment, the company responsible for the localization of both Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! 4Kids had to watch as the series they had helped to introduce to America rocketed to the top of the industry, while they still had to make do dubbing this crappy show called One Piece. That's why they were looking to invest in a property they could exercise total control over. Through their gaming division, TC Digital Games, 4Kids would work with Apex Marketing and Brian Gannon to bring Chaotic to America in 2006, but not with the card game. No, instead it would get an animated series first to get people familiar with the concept. The plot changed from Tom and Kaz, a 12-year-old kid and his bully, getting transported to the land of Param by magical rings. I don't know if Kaz was a cyborg before being sent to the magical world, but whatever. To Chaotic being what it was in the real world, a card game with an online component, but instead of just logging in, you'd get transported to a whole new virtual world, and from there you could transport yourself to Param to scan creatures, locations, and weaponry to use as cards in the card game. Weaponry from the original game, like a fucking gun, were swapped out for more fantastical battle gear, and what were spell cards in Now or Never became magical songs called music. Yu-Gi-Oh! Had to change magic cards to spell cards, then Chaotic had to change spell cards to music cards. The next guy who thinks of naming his cards music is in for a hell of a hard time. On top of those changes, the lore was changed one last time as Madcap was heavily medicated into Maxor, and from there, the story was set. Overworlders versus Underworlders. Danians and Mepedians kinda just hate everyone, and the battle for Param began. And once the card game would come out a year later in 2007, the world would open up even more. The lasting legacy of Chaotic was secured in part due to their dedication to the storyline. Sam Murakami, an employee at 4Kids, Martin Ralph, the original designer of Now or Never, and Brian Gannon crafted a world with so much detail told throughout the show and the cards that learning just one character's backstory would take you across the entire world and, more importantly, multiple card sets. Learning the background for, let's say this ant, look at how much is written, how many different events he took part in. Multiple characters across each of the different factions had these sorts of storylines. This was just one of many. This would be best shown off in the game's various expansions, where reprints of character cards would be used as a chance to advance plotlines and characters. A few trickled out during the game's initial wave, but it wasn't until Set 4, Beyond the Doors, that Chaotic's storyline would kick into overdrive with the Marillion invasion. Eldritch monsters unleashed from behind an ancient door that brainwashed creatures from across all 4 tribes, and forced them to all work together to stop them. Cards would be reprinted as tainted versions with brainwashed effects that only worked when a Marillion was on the field. Creatures previously of one tribe would reveal themselves to have been Marillions all along, and characters who used to have the loyal trait, which meant they could only be used in a deck of their tribe, lost that as a symbol of them working together. The card lore may have been half the appeal, but the other half was the online component. Just like in Now or Never, the cards had codes that corresponded to the card you had, and by entering them online, you could play the card game with people all over the world. All over the country. All over the block. All over the house. Okay, so the idea was cool, but we're talking about 2000's early internet. Seeing a photo that you didn't take on a screen was considered the height of fantasy. Look at how many different trading card games are connected to the internet in some way. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic. Some TCGs exist exclusively online, like Hearthstone and Legends of Runeterra. And before every one of them, Chaotic made internet-based functionality its entire hook. The cartoon as well had a huge part to play in that. Playing alongside the established big hitters like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Made it look legit right out of the gate. even if it didn't quite look legit. The first season was animated in Flash, and all these years it still hasn't circled back around to being charming. Listen, I'm the first one to come to Flash's defense as a useful tool in the right hands, but these were not the right hands. This show looks rough. And it was set to look that rough in the next season, as the first season ends on a cliffhanger, and when coming— but what the— This has to be a case of stolen identity. You were not this hot before! Animation transitioned from the Canadian studio Bardell, who worked on everything from Rick and Morty to Rover Dangerfield, to the Korean studio Dongwoo Animation. And the upgrade— I mean, come on. I get having nostalgia for the old art style, but some people have nostalgia for Watergate. That doesn't mean it was a good time. So, we've got a successful cartoon that got people into the game by actually teaching them how to play, a successful game that outpaced Magic the Gathering at a point and was the third best-selling TCG in America, and a team dedicated to expanding it further. What was missing? A future. Despite all this success, in 2010, Chaotic went cold. Suddenly, the latest expansion, Fire and Stone, was delayed and eventually outright cancelled. The show stopped its third season only 12 episodes in, and after years of silence, the franchise ended completely. So what gives? Okay, this is not easy. Now, if you have some awareness about Chaotic, you might know the reason. Or more likely, you think you know the reason. See, the cancellation of Chaotic coincides with a lot of problems at 4Kids the company. They were being audited by both the Pokemon Company International and Konami, and were found to have withheld income from both companies, resulting in them temporarily losing the license to those properties. As a neat little aside, this resulted in a separate dub of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal produced by Bang Zoom, with Johnny Young Bosch of Power Rangers, Devil May Cry, and anime fame as Yuma. Back with Chaotic, though, a lawsuit was taking place during this, between 4Kids and TC Digital Media, the company that was now being run by Brian Gannon and owners of the license to Chaotic. During the suit, the judge ruled that neither side would be able to make or sell any Chaotic products, including the cards or the show, until the trial was finished. That means that packs in stores had to be unshelved. 4Kids dragged its feet until they died from bankruptcy, and the rights would revert back to Brian Gannon and TC Digital Media. But it was too late. Chaotic wasn't on the airs anymore, and had lost its place in the cultural zeitgeist. It's a cut-and-dry lawsuit. 4Kids got greedy and wanted to cut TC Digital Media out and keep all the profits. Got it? Good. Because everything I just told you is 100% bullshit. Okay, so when you do any amount of research, or even just give a cursory glance to Chaotic and what happened to it, everybody says the same thing. They say that 4Kids got greedy and wanted full control of the Chaotic license and to cut TC Digital Media out of the equation, so they could hog all the profits to themselves.
But what was really going on was a bunch of privately handled lawsuits regarding the rights to the property of Chaotic between TC Digital and 4Kids Entertainment.
They were tired of working with Brian, and if you learn anything about 4Kids, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. The lawsuit lasted several years, and because the rights for the franchise was being disputed, neither party could actually do anything with it during that time.
4Kids Entertainment sued Apex Marketing for the full rights of Chaotic. The details of the original deal and the basis of the lawsuit is kind of hard to find, but 4Kids apparently lost the lawsuit.
That sounds like a very 4Kids thing to do. It's common knowledge that 4Kids' board of directors was made up of cannibalistic, piss-guzzling dog kickers who needed a fresh supply of newborn baby hearts to keep turning rice balls into jelly donuts. But let's say you do any more research than as little research as you can do, and under the slightest scrutiny, the entire story falls apart. First off, let's start with the most basic question you can ask. What gets countless student papers failed every day? What are your sources? You see, this lawsuit doesn't have basis in f***ing Param, let alone the real world. Any attempt to find evidence that this lawsuit ever happened only results in hearsay and conjecture from Chaotic fans on forums, Reddits, and YouTube comments, but not one ever has a source to cite. You know why? Because their source was a forum, Reddit post, or YouTube comment. No documentation mentions this lawsuit, and the only place it is mentioned is in Chaotic Spaces when discussing the game's downfall. But what about the Wikipedia article? It clearly states the lawsuit did them in. You're right! It does! Without a source. The most they say is that a dedicated group of fans discovered the privately settled lawsuits, but not where they found them, who found them, certainly not how they found them, because trying to find the lawsuits for yourself, nothing! It's a coincidence, really. I was digging in my back garden for a busheling new arugula plant, and what do I find buried? Why, court documents of 4Kids vs. TC Digital Media! Try as you might, there's no evidence of a lawsuit of this nature ever taking place. And immediately after, the same people who proposed the lawsuit idea have the same canned response. Oh, well, it was handled privately, so the information can't be made public. Oh, okay. Not how the law works, though. A case where neither side has broken a law and is instead a case of corporations suing each other would be a civil case, and civil cases are a matter of public record. On top of that, 4Kids was a publicly traded company, with shareholders that would have had to have been informed if this sort of thing happened. But no information as to this trial, let alone its existence, has ever been made public. In the same way the documents from the Battle of Helm's Deep have not been made public, because it didn't happen. Well, that's because of the second reason. Non-disclosure agreements. Everyone involved had to sign NDAs to muzzle them from discussing the lawsuit. Oh, okay. Still not how the law works, though. NDAs are powerful, but they're not all powerful. Something NDAs don't cover is the disclosure that you're under one. That's just impossible. Voice actors say all the time, "Ooh, I'm so excited for this role I'm cast in," but I can't say anything. I'm under an NDA. Saying an NDA is in place doesn't keep you from discussing that you're under one. So even if there was some sort of document in place, that wouldn't stop somebody like Brian Gannon from disclosing that a lawsuit had taken place. But he hasn't, because it didn't! Moreover, why put an NDA in place at all? This case isn't really one that needs to stay hush-hush, so the only explanation is that 4Kids would do it because 4Kids are meanies, which, great, really glad that censoring Pokemon is still something we give a shit about. Then there's the story about the judge putting a hold on chaotic production or distribution while the lawsuit was going on, and are you listening to yourself? Let's look at the two outcomes of the lawsuit. 4Kids wins and owns 100% of the chaotic brand. 4Kids loses and owns 55% of the brand. No matter what, 4Kids would have a majority stake in the brand, so there would be no reason for the judge to do that. If it was a dispute of licensing, like 4Kids faced with Yu-Gi-Oh! That forced them to stop production on the dub and for Konami to switch to Bang Zoom, or if 4Kids was being sued to have Chaotic taken away from them by a third party, then a hold would be applied. It wouldn't be right to sell a product that's currently in legal limbo between two separate companies, but TC Digital Media is a subsidiary of 4Kids, so no matter what, 4Kids has the majority of the rights to Chaotic. In a struggle like this, there is zero reason for a hold to be put on. Okay, then what if there was no hold then? What if 4Kids was trying to stop production to weaken the brand so they could control it more? Really? The brand they're currently going through an expensive lawsuit to acquire? The brand they had sunk at least $30 million into? The brand that refuses to turn a profit? That's the brand they want to make weaker? No matter how you slice it, no matter how you try and justify it, the story regarding a lawsuit against TC Digital Media just doesn't hold up to any amount of critical thinking. But then what did happen? Well, this might be a part as to why the lawsuit story is so much more widespread than the actual reason. The actual reasons are kinda boring and sad. The Chaotic card game was a big success. Was. In the first 3 quarters of the game's production, the game had met expectations. Not exceeded them, not fallen short, it did exactly as good as they had expected. That last quarter, though? Fuck the other 3 quarters, this is the only one that matters. Quarter 4 is the most important one for a toy's production, because Quarter 4 is Christmas. If your toy dies on the vine during Christmas, that's a sign you're in deep, deep trouble. Despite having the home field advantage, Quarter 4 for 4Kids was a disaster, as Chaotic failed to meet its goals by a comical amount, going from $7.3 million in Quarter 3 to $500,000 in Quarter 4. Hey, if they scrubbed out on question 13 of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, they could have made that an even million. I would have left 2, though. The last question was, how do you make Chaotic a success? In 2009, a similar thing happened, as profits dropped by over $12 million from the same time last year. You have to understand contextually as well. The 2008 and 9 financial crisis impacted 4Kids and the game significantly. Times were tough. Money was tight. Families had to make judgment calls as to what they needed and save every penny. If you're in that situation, or better yet, were in that situation, what's the first thing you cut? Well, how about a child's luxury item that requires you to pump money into it to get new cards? That's the first place cuts are getting made. The cartoon as well was a mixed bag in terms of profit. The show itself never became the popular hit on the 4Kids programming block it needed to be in order to break even. It never beat its contemporaries like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Sonic, or Yu-Gi-Oh! In the ratings. And even when it started airing on the Cartoon Network, it never caught on. This was a 4Kids production as well. They had to invest millions more into it than they would into Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Since they weren't adapting somebody else's work. This was wholly original. That meant that lower ratings, plus increased production costs, plus the failure of the card game meant that in 2010, 4Kids had to shutter TC Digital Media as a cost-cutting measure to try to stay afloat, which they were only able to do for another 4 years. Chaotic fans have clung to this theory about a lawsuit for years, when in reality, the truth is just that 4Kids took a gamble and went bust. 4Kids doing it because 4Kids is evil is the easy answer. It's a popular opinion, so when you put it into an argument, everybody instantly agrees because, oh, well, they have to have done it. They did the One Piece dub. What else are they capable of? That sort of blind hatred gets in the way of reporting on what actually happened, though. It's the easy way out to say that 4Kids did it because 4Kids are bad, than it is to do the research and to see what actually happened. I don't like being the guy who defends 4Kids when they make poo-poo in their diapers, but it's important to be able to separate yourself from the sorts of biases that people have towards 4Kids, and look at the circumstances behind things like Chaotic, behind things like the One Piece dub. It's maddening to see people still stuck in a 2007 mindset, where Brock calling rice balls jelly donuts is treated like the end of the world. The card game and everything surrounding it was still as high quality as it ever was, but the reason for its disappearance wasn't some big conspiracy. It just wasn't popular enough. However, it was popular enough for a video game, Chaotic Shadow Warriors. Published in 2009 by Activision and developed by Fun Labs. Heads up, if there are any deer or similar big game animals watching this video, just steer clear of the Fun Labs game catalog. This was a company that dealt in Cabela hunting games almost exclusively, for when you need to prove your dick wasn't little, but it's August. Other than the Cabela games, most of their games were either small on-rails shooters like Men in Black Alien Crisis, or as a support studio on games like Angry Birds Trilogy for the Wii U, or Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. Why yes, I developed Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. Of course you can trust me to hold your baby. The game launched on all major platforms at the time, Xbox, PS3, Wii, and DS, and would receive a critical, what the? Most major outlets didn't give it the time of day because, well, the Cabela guys just made an RPG based on those cards your son begged you to buy but then never learned the rules to. What were they supposed to do? Give a shit? Chaotic Shadow Warriors is a game of two halves. Half semi-open world shooter with the lightest exploration elements possible, and half a recreation of the card game with more gamified elements, to keep it from being an out-and-out simulator. As Tom, the main character from the show, you get thrust into the world of Param, and are free to explore the straight line forward to your heart's content. The world looks grand and open, at first, but it only takes a few steps for you to realize that the entire experience is gonna be railroaded down a single trail with a few offshoots to find items to use during combat. A few steps after you realize that, you get to meet up with our first creature, Atacat. And I've seen more upsetting things than these cutscenes, but not many. Atacat is as tall as a goddamn mountain, swollen to the point of popping, and animated like a kid who has to pee and can't stand still. Atacat tells us some Mepedians have stolen battle gear and tasks us with looking for where they've gone. Tom promises to keep an eye out for any Mepedians, and the other eye on the wall behind them. Before you get into a fight, you also get to see everything the overworld has to offer, as you find some extra battle gear, music, and making a big return from the original chaotic Now or Never, a fucking gun. You will notice the glowing spots all over the ground. You will not interact with them. With the gun, you can blast through the insects that are blocking the path forward. The gun automatically aims no matter where the opponent is, and has a charge shot that kills all enemies in a set area instantly. For the first area of the game, fighting enemies has no incentive. They don't drop anything, and the only thing they do is send you back a few paces if you touch them. The gun and these insects, at first at least, only act as a way for you and the right trigger to get comfortable with each other. Once you get past them, it's time to learn the combat, and, like I said, it's a modified version of the game's basic rule set. Instead of having your field of creatures, a land deck, an attack deck, and a music hand, it plays out way more like a typical RPG battle. Every creature comes with a set of pre-baked attacks it can pick from, and it can use battle gear as pre-game equips to boost its stats, and music to act as consumable spells that you can use throughout the battle. Initiating battle has you selecting your team of creatures, in my case, Atacat and all his friends, equipping the battle gear that you want to increase one of your disciplines, say it with me now, courage, strength, wisdom, and speed, and getting into it. Attacks work on an AP system where you only have so many action points you can use at a time, but you can regain them by doing a weak basic attack. The stronger the move, the more AP points it'll take to cast it. And just like in the real card game, certain attacks will have a skill check where you compare stats with the opponent for a damage boost. Once you pick the move you want to use, you play a little quick time event to see if you can earn a few extra AP points or deal extra damage. Once you finish, your opponent takes their turn, and from there, you have two options. Firstly, you can block the attack by holding down the right trigger and mashing A. Oh, thank goodness I got practice. The other thing you can do is scan them. By keeping your cursor in the center of this circle, you start to scan the opponent. And when you get the scan to 100%, you collect that creature's scan and can use them as a part of your deck. On paper, that is an incredible mechanic. Any game that lets you collect enemies as allies is always going to get my attention, especially if it differs from the Pokemon collection method. Shin Megami Tensei letting you barter with demons, for instance, is a system I enjoy a lot.
Thank you, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne.
One of the problems, though, is that it adheres a bit too strictly to a mechanic from Chaotic the TV show. When you scan a monster, you scan them as they are, from the moment that you scan them, which is how the show explains each creature having randomized stats. If Odu Bathox is feeling a little gassy when he gets scanned, he's gonna have less courage, but it will give him such good wisdom. In here, though, it also means that the creature's health that you get will be their health when you scan them, so instead of a new creature you just scanned being a powerful addition to your army, it's a helpless corpse that can barely stand on its own. And that's not until you heal it off. No, the scan health becomes base health. It always reverts back to it at the end of a fight. So the obvious answer then is to only scan at the beginning of matches when creature health is at its highest, right? Well, that does make sense, and it is the best idea, but now you're on a death clock, since the opponent's not gonna stop attacking just because you're taking its photo. Hey, babe, mind if I get your phone number? No, you can take kidney shots at me while I write it down, that's cool. So for the early game, you have no options but to ignore the mechanic for the sake of living, because you're not gonna last long if all you're doing is taking photos of the enemy kicking the crap out of you. After completing the tutorial, the game rewards you with one of the few times an Xbox game has ever hard crashed on me, and forces you to redo the entire fight. This is actually for the people in the back not paying attention. If you're on your phones, I blame you! Now, fights in this game are extremely odd because there's a lot to them that the game doesn't really touch on. For starters, stats mean nothing. You'd think your disciplines would affect gameplay in some way, like strength creatures doing better physical damage, wise creatures being better at music, speed creatures acting first, and courageous creatures having more health. No, instead, every stat is just for challenges or stat checks for your moves. A creature with 0 strength and a creature with 100 strength are gonna deal the same damage with the basic move, and instantly this entire portion of the card is pretty much worthless. Aside from how it affects the moves, these stats don't impact the character at all. So a creature scanned at the start of the game and a creature scanned at the end of the game are gonna be just as viable as each other. And that feels really bad. You don't get a sense of progress or even a feeling that one tribe differs greatly from the other. Instead, you're pretty much just swapping between different skins for the same set of moves. A result of this is that battle gear has no real effect on gameplay. You can equip some to buff your stats and help you beat skill checks you couldn't before, but once you equip one that works, that's all you're ever going to equip. You should never take it off. I had most of my team equipped with the Ring of Narin because it boosts 3 stats at the same time, and as long as that was an option, why would I pick one that only boosted a single stat by less than what the ring did? Or use a battle gear I have to sacrifice to give my creature an elemental stat for a single turn. The elements function the same way as the disciplines as ways to boost attacks, but a lot of the creatures draw from elements they don't even have. So you either have to use a weaker version of the move, or sacrifice battle gear every time you battle just to get it to its fullest potential. And this isn't a case of sacrificing a useful item for a temporary big boost. All the battle gear does is be sacrificable. That's all it does. This all comes back to a question you might have had early on though. Well, why would I use a creature who could only give himself a skill boost or an elemental boost temporarily, when I could just use one that has it always on by default? Great question. You could help me out a lot by also giving me the answer. Once you find the guys with good stats or a lot of elements, you never switch off of them, invalidating the monster collecting entirely by not giving you a reason to collect monsters. So, a few battles later, we've managed to scan 3 whole usable guys, because pretty much all of my overworlders have the loyal trait, which means they don't approve of a mixed race army, and will only team with other overworlders. Finally, racism as a gameplay element! We bash our way through the last of the Mepedians and find out they're not Mepedians at all. They're shadow creatures, created by an overworld battle gear that's been stolen. We head off to the Mepedian desert to find Maxor, so an adult can take over the situation. Some ugly bitch named Bodil crashes the game for a second time, and tells me that if I want to stop the attacks of the Shadow Warriors, we need all 6 fragments of an ancient music that are scattered all across Param. He also gives me 3 Bodil scans. Why is one of them nude? By this point, I managed to scan enough Mepedians that I could construct a team of only them. And when playing, they play the exact goddamn same. Except for the Danians, Overworlders, Underworlders, and Mepedians all play the exact same, only broken up by some music that can only be used by each race, like Overworlders getting more healing music, and Underworlders getting more damaging music. What do Mepedians get? An excuse to keep living! Mepedians are in this game by accident. You only run into 7 across the entire game out of the 39 creatures in it. They have 3 music spells specific to them. There's a battle gear that turns off the entire tribe's invisibility gimmick that lets them deal a little extra damage at the start of a fight. If you try and use Mepedians, you're gonna lose. Later on, you meet up with Momark, an overworld scientist, who gives us the ability to merge scans, which means you can fuse 3 scans of the same creature together to get an upgraded form. And if you get 3 upgrades, you can merge them again into their strongest form. Wow, that sounds like a nightmare. Now, if I had to compare Chaotic Shadow Warriors to anything, I'd say it's a combination of Final Fantasy VIII and Paper Mario Sticker Star. For RPG fans, that's not a recipe for success, that's a recipe for a bomb. The Final Fantasy VIII portion comes in with the scans. Just like Final Fantasy VIII's draw and junction system, as soon as you see a new monster, you want it! You want to fill out your collection, see what new abilities it might have. And in the case of creatures like Nazarin, you're not sure when you're ever going to get to see him again, or if you'll see him again. The game has a major fear of missing out, so you have to park yourself and scan any new monsters that you find. But again, if you want them to be usable, you have to scan them at the start of the battle, and pray your team can weather whatever's coming. But then the fusion system comes in, and we start to see what really makes it feel like Final Fantasy VIII, and that's that you have to sit there for 3 times as long to scan the same creature 3 times. If you don't, then you won't be able to fuse into a 3-star. And if it's not a 3-star, guess what? You're going in the garbage! So you sit there and have to scan the same guy 3 times in a row. Nothing changing, just trying to get the process over with as fast as you can. And praying they use a Mujic, since the animation is so long, it can count for half a scan on its own. If you want to pass the time without damaging the creature and ruining your scan, you also have the final option. Taunt.
Are you tough on the outside and soft on the inside, or the other way around?
You are apparently not aware of my exquisite tactical skills.
This ought to clear your sinuses.
While you're trapped in this hell of your own creation, you also get intimately familiar with all the voice lines. Now, 4Kids acting to me is the height of nostalgia. They had like 8 male voices and 4 female voices, so you started recognizing them really quickly. I don't really mind it though. I even started playing a little game where I tried guessing who was gonna voice what character. Come on, give me a Ted Lewis! Ted Lewis! Damn it! It's an Eric Stewart! At the end of the day, this is the only franchise where you can say unironically that Sonic plays as Goku.
No, but I could help you look for them. And maybe get him a Pedion scan or 2 at the same time.
I'm trying to consider you a decent opponent, but you're making this very difficult.
Now, I like the voices, not huge on what they're saying. Every move has a few voice lines tied to it. Either calling out the name, saying a little pun phrase like, "This will start my winning streak," or just screaming. Now, the problem is that pun phrase is not unique to each character. It's unique to the move. If any character uses Shriek Shock, they'll say that line. If any character uses Delirium, they'll say, "Here's something for your lack of inspiration." I'm so sick of it already. How much longer till the sun explodes? I guess I can wait a little longer. So scanning is a tedious chore that eats up 3 times the time an already tedious chore ate up, but look on the bright side, the bugs finally have a purpose since they drop the points you need for fusions. Now what about that sticker star half? Whenever that game gets brought up, people usually start running, but you've been brave enough to stick around. Well, one of the most hated aspects of the game, besides its continued existence, was that attacks are consumable items that exist in finite amounts. You can't use basic attacks while being sure you'll be able to do them again. That similar system is in Shadow Warriors, except instead it's with the Mujic and Battle Gear. Every time you use Mujic or expend a Battle Gear by sacrificing it, you lose it forever. It's gone. In the case of some Battle Gear, you can find enough rings and then you're set for the game. But the Mujic, there's a set amount of Mujic across the whole game. If you use all your decrescendo spells, that's it. You'll never be able to use the spell again. You can't buy more since the game doesn't have an experience, loot, or even money system. There's no stores, no merchants, no way to get more spells aside from finding them in the overworld. That fear of missing out I mentioned? It's even worse in regard to the item selection. Everyone knows that feeling in an RPG where you get that one really good but rare item and are afraid to use it. Because it's so good, you don't want to waste it when a bigger challenge might be coming up. Chaotic Shadow Warriors decided to make every single spell in the game work like that, since there are only so many healing and damaging spells to go around. You might use them all before you really need them. So you just stock up more and more, so frightened to ever heal or use a damage spell because what if I need it later? What if the police pull me over and ask to see my cannon of casualty? What then? You know what else is finite too? Battles. That's right, there are only so many encounters in this game, and because of that, there are no random ones. Every fight you have is gonna happen when we say it happens. Without an experience system, though, or any way to get stronger, there are less tests of your skill and more roadblocks that just keep getting put in your way over and over. Occasionally they'll have a new creature to scan, but that's a double-edged sword. Ah, cool, a new creature! Ah, crap, my next hour just got booked up. If it doesn't have a new creature, you just gotta get through the battle, and they tried making battles more interactive with the boosting QTEs, but it doesn't make much of a noticeable impact. Moves aren't significantly stronger, maybe by a single point, but you better do it since if you don't, the enemy's guard will eat up almost the entire move. Battling gets old super fast, and doesn't vary itself at all between regions. Characters you battle with, just fight after fight, one after the other, where you never vary up your strategy at all. For how much time they waste and for how minimal the stat increase is, I'd even say fusions aren't worth it in the long run, given they mostly just buff your disciplines, which don't matter much. Except they also increase health, so you're gonna want to do it for when the game starts sending Underworlders who are strapped to the gills with 20 damage spells that can kill some creatures in a single shot. Without an experience or progression system for yourself, your creatures, or anything, the game feels really flat. The team you tackle the first Mepedian with could also take on the final boss, and that's just not satisfying. The dream with every Pokemon run is to beat the Elite Four with the first 6 Pokemon you catch, but not in their first forms. They evolve, they get stronger, they improve and get new moves. In Chaotic Shadow Warriors, nothing like that happens. And guess what? A lot of Chaotic characters have evolutions, so it's not like they couldn't integrate it into the game. They just didn't. The game throws you variety in the form of a few challenges in the overworld, like platforming and tile puzzles, but at the end of the day, it's not nearly enough to make up for how boring battles become after a few fights, and on top of that, they're also bad. Once you find a winning team comp that gives you heavy hitters, Mujic supporters, and Nazarin to draw fire at the start of every single game without fail, the game becomes really, really easy. This happens around the midway point, and after you get Interest, Heptad, Maxor, Ivana, and Nazarin, you don't ever have to worry about scanning because this is as good as it gets. You have the chance to scan Danians during the Danian chapter, and they're mechanically unique, but also mechanically bad. They're supposed to have the Hive ability like they have in the card game, but that revolves around having a lot of Mandiblores around. And that doesn't really translate to a game with only 5 spots to spare. Underworlders are about as good as Overworlders, but you can only scan worthwhile ones at the very end of the game, when you only have about 4 battles left. You can use them, but why force an old dog to learn new tricks? It's just not fair. Sadly, once you describe a single fight, you've described all of them. And it makes discussion really hard since the majority of the game isn't especially interesting past the first hour. If you want a positive though, the graphics for this game aren't half bad. Seeing as the team behind this made the Cabela games, it shouldn't be too big of a shocker to see that the game nails its jungle environments, but the desert, the underground, and especially the lava lands of the underworld are a treat to see. Music as well is a pretty fine part of the game. It mostly uses stuff from the series, which means fans of the show are gonna get a kick out of it. And on that topic, I can see Chaotic Mega fans getting more out of this than anybody. Me? I'm more a fan of backs of boxes, and what some games have to do to stretch the definition of selling points. Inflict vicious ranged attacks. Now see, if this game didn't have ranged attacks, I wouldn't have bought it, but now that it does, made a customer out of me. Over 40 unique playable characters. Oh, so false advertising is legal now. The game ends with Kaor, who is Satan, getting bustled off screen by some guys as the real villain, Lord Von Blut, makes it known that he stole the Overworlders' battle gear that makes innumerable shadow clones of every living creature on the planet. Why did the good guys have this? We chase him down and endure a few more fights before we find him, kick his balls, and get one of the most bizarrely paced cutscenes you've ever seen.
So, you have the mutant. Too bad humans can't have mutations. Maybe you'll have one in your next life.
Maybe I don't have to wait that long. Maxor!
You've won the battle, not the war. I'll be back!
You're lucky I'm letting you go. So are you.
Major Top, the Codemasters are waiting for word on how the super scanner is functioning.
Actually, it sorta got broken.
I hope you have a good explanation.
I have a great explanation, but I'm not sure you'll believe it.
Now with the game completed and every scan unlocked, you now have the ability to play multiplayer. You and a friend can go one-on-one to battle it out with all your creatures, and... well, I can't speak to how much fun it is to play personally. I kinda get why you'd want to do this. Chaotic is a complicated game, and this game is... anything but. So this game as a resource to play something close to Chaotic without a 16-minute tutorial is something I understand. It ultimately comes down to something fans of Chaotic might enjoy, but for most people it is a hard pass. Luckily, this wouldn't be one of the final notes for the franchise to go out on, as in 2009, Brian Gannon had announced that after a 5-year effort to get the rights back, he had acquired the rights to Chaotic, and was looking for ways to reintroduce the series, like reprints of classic cards, printings of never-released cards like the Fire and Stone expansion, new cards altogether, tournament play, video games, apps, a revival of the TV show, a movie? Okay, don't do that. But I feel like now is the time for Chaotic to finally reap what it sowed. Online card games have become huge business since Chaotic went away, and games like Hearthstone have proved that you can use the medium specifically to create features that would never be possible in paper play. I think that even disregarding a physical TCG, a purely digital Chaotic game with the framing device that it has now is a genius idea. If you do want to keep the physical component, AR functionality could make the game really appealing to spectators and make them want to get into it. News on work that's been done on the reboot is sparse, but that's largely down to how investors want to manage things. You can't announce a bunch of plans, then look for investors. They're the ones who make the plans. As recently as the last couple of months, Brian's been showing off Chaotic's place at trade events, so I feel sooner or later, there's a great chance we'll see something big. Like confirmation that the lawsuit never happened.